Hello everybody and welcome back to another video by FunLearn Tutorials. In today's video we are going to be considering the decomposability property. Now you might be wondering what the decomposability property is. To understand what the decomposability property is, we first have to understand the term itself. Let's look at the word and think of the word decomposability. So the word decomposability comes from decompose, right? So something has to be decomposed. Now, if you're talking about decomposability property, it means something has to be decomposed, and you might know that the decomposability properties are applied for some models. So the obvious issue would be that we'll have to decompose some models. Now, what are the models that we can decompose? Let's think of something for the time being. Let's remember something called the issue of the classical dichotomy, say for example. So let me write down classical dichotomy. So classical dichotomy. Now, if you all remember what the classical dichotomy is, the classical dichotomy is basically the idea that the economy has two sectors. Okay, so the economy has two sectors, not two sectors in the terms of industry or agriculture or something like that, but the economy has two halves. So the economy has two halves. What are the two halves? The two halves are the real sector. One is the real sector and the other is the monetary sector. So one is the real sector and the other is the monetary or the nominal sector. Now, the concept of classical dichotomy, the classical dichotomy is that this real sector and this monetary sector, they are both independent of each other. So if you do something to the monetary side, the real side will remain unhampered. So if you increase something in the monetary side, the real side remains the same. If you decrease something on the monetary side, the real side remains the same. This is the concept of classical dichotomy. What do you end up doing is you end up decomposing the economy into two halves. That is also decomposing the economy. Here also we will consider of a similar thing, which is the decomposability of a model. Now, how can you decompose a model? Let's imagine something like the Jones 1965 model. So you have the Jones 1965 model, or you have the Jones 1971 model. These two are very popular economic models where basically you consider the economy to have the agricultural manufacturing sector. So you have agricultural sector and you have manufacturing sector. Now, where is the two sides of the economy? So do you mean that we need to decompose the economy into the agricultural and manufacturing economy? Of course not. Here we divided the economy into real side and a monetary side. These two divisions give us some idea about how we can decompose the economy in case of the Jones 1965 model or the Jones 1971 model. So, if you think of the equations, there were some equations which determined the price of the sectors. So, in Jones 65 model, you have an equation which has a PA term, which are essentially determined by the factor incomes. So, you have those as equations of W and R. Similarly, you have some equations which involve the endowments, the factor endowments. So you have K, L. In Jones, you actually have three sectors. So suppose you have T. So those are essentially the endowments. So these are called the price equations. So these are called the price equations. You have something called the price equations. And then you have something called the endowment equations. So you have something called the endowment equations, or you can also call them the output equations. Basically, I am calling them the endowment equations because they equate the factor endowment. So you have K bar, L bar, T bar, which are the factor supplies in the economy, and you have the factor demands on one hand. So these essentially give you the endowment, or basically the output side, basically how much output is generated. Now, try to compare between this exercise that we did, this exercise of classical dichotomy, and you realize that the economy is a real sector and a monetary sector, a combination of that. If you think of this, you see the price equations can be connected to the nominal side. So you have the price equations which are comparable to the monetary or the nominal side. Whereas the real sectors, if you remember in the original classical dichotomy idea, the real is you have something like the real output, you have the real growth rate. So those are the real aspects, right? In monetary side, you have money supply, you have price. These are your monetary variables. In the real side, you have all the real output and other real variables. So this real part of the economy, the classical dichotomy issue, real part can be connected to, can you guess which part? The endowment part. So you have the non-monetary, or you have the monetary or the nominal side of the economy in a classical dichotomy and a real side in the classical dichotomy. If you look at the equations in the Jones 1965 and the Jones 1971 model, you can also divide the equations into some equations which deal with the price equations and they represent the nominal side or the price side, and then you have some equations which are the endowment or the output equations and they deal with the real side. So then what is the concept of decomposability? Just like how in the classical dichotomy, the monetary nominal side is independent of the real side, the decomposability property states that, so the decomposability property. The decomposability property is basically the output system. So this output system that I was talking about, what do you mean by the output system? These output systems, not these one, these one. These output systems are independent of the price systems. So isn't this similar to the classical dichotomy that we considered? So is independent of the price system. So the output system is independent of the price system. This system, let me use my laser ones. This system is independent of this system. So the output system is independent of the price system. So you can understand that this idea is similar to the classical dichotomy issue. The classical dichotomy issue. The classical dichotomy. So now you might be wondering, how can we apply the decomposability property in the Jones 1965 and the Jones 1971 model? So in the next videos, I will be talking about how to actually visualize the decomposability property in the Jones 1965 and 71 model. And for that, we have to solve the model and see how they solve. Where is the manifestation of this independence? I said that they are independent, right? How is this independent occurring? So you have seen that if I do something to the monetary side, nothing happens to the real side. How are we doing that in this sort of economy? So that is what we'll be discussing in the next videos.